Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking something genuinely fascinating. Think about it. Every single day, you and I navigate a world of just staggering complexity. Whether it's a CEO pivoting a billion-dollar company overnight or an doctor triaging a multi-system failure in literal seconds, the brain doesn't just guess in those high-stakes moments. It relies on a deeply ingrained, highly specific mental architecture. So today, we're mapping out the architecture of human reasoning. We're going to explore the exact mental toolkit that lets us make sense of the universe, and we'll analyze the frameworks that literally power human intelligence and progress. But it all starts with one really fundamental mystery. How do we actually draw conclusions? When you're staring down a massive problem at work or trying to make a complex strategic decision, your brain goes through a highly coordinated process. But what is that process exactly? How do we take a messy, chaotic world filled with noise and contradictory data and somehow filter it all down into a clear, actionable conclusion?
Section 1. The Blueprint of Reasoning.
By definition, reasoning is the structured process of drawing conclusions, solving problems, and making decisions based on evidence, logic, or patterns. Now, the absolute most critical word for us to anchor on here is structured, because when we strip away that structure, we see exactly what happens when reasoning breaks down. We default to cognitive biases, we lean on emotional impulses, and we fall back on flawed heuristics. That structure of reasoning is quite literally the defense mechanism protecting us from our own irrationality. It's this incredible evidence-based operation happening right inside your head, using logic and patterns as guardrails. Once you grasp this foundational blueprint, you can really start to see how the specialized tools in your mental kit actually keep your decision-making on track.
Section 2. Deductive versus inductive logic.
So, deductive and inductive logic, these are foundational powerhouses, but they work in completely inverse directions. Deductive reasoning, it's sharp, it's precise, and it's totally top-down. It starts with broad general principles and applies them to highly specific cases to formally prove a theory. Imagine a doctor diagnosing a patient. They know a general medical rule. Say, if a patient has a specific virus, they'll exhibit a specific rash. By observing the rash, they apply the general rule to prove the specific diagnosis. Very definitive. On the flip side, inductive reasoning is expansive and bottom-up. It moves from specific, isolated observations to build sweeping generalizations or overarching theories. Think of a medical researcher instead of the diagnosing doctor. That researcher observes hundreds of unique individual patient cases, gathers up all that isolated data, and builds a brand new, broad medical theory right from the ground up. Together, this push and pull of applying known rules and discovering nuance, that is the absolute bedrock of how we process facts.
Section 3. Making connective mental leaps.
Analogical reasoning is an incredibly powerful mental shortcut. It draws comparisons between similar situations or concepts to infer meaning or predict outcomes. When we face something totally unfamiliar, our brain instantly asks, okay, what is this similar to? But there's immense power and extreme danger in this tool. Historical analogies constantly shape modern business and geopolitical decisions. If a company correctly analyzes a new market trend to a past success, they can build an absolute empire. But then think about Blockbuster. They arguably analyzed early streaming video to niche mail-order DVD services. They completely misidentified the core similarities, the analogy failed, and, well, we all know it led to a historic collapse. Analogical reasoning is brilliant, provided we're meticulously careful about exactly which past experiences we use as our compass.
But what happens when you just don't have all the information? Enter abductive reasoning. This is all about forming the most plausible explanation from incomplete data. It is the ultimate detective's tool. In diagnostics, emergency responses, or investigative contexts, you almost never have all the facts up front. You have clues, you have fragments. Unlike deductive reasoning, where you have a proven rule, or inductive reasoning, where you have a massive data set, abductive reasoning lives in the gray area. It's exactly how a mechanic diagnoses a smoking engine, or how Sherlock Holmes famously takes a smudge of mud on a shoe and forms the most likely, plausible hypothesis. It's an essential survival mechanism for a world where information is constantly hidden or obscured.
Now, understanding exactly how events link together is crucial, which brings us to cause and effect reasoning. This framework identifies the direct relationships between an action and an outcome, but navigating this requires intense precision. Why? Because the greatest trap in human reasoning is confusing correlation with causation. Look, just because a rooster crows every morning right before the sun rises doesn't mean the rooster caused the sunrise, right? For advanced problem solving, true cause and effect reasoning isn't just about noticing that step 1 precedes step 2. It's about rigorously isolating variables. It's stripping away the noise to find the genuine, undeniable driver of an outcome. Without this exact tool, we end up just treating symptoms instead of curing the actual disease. We react to random noise instead of fixing the root cause. Section 4. The analytical breakdown. Critical thinking integrates analysis, evaluation, and reflection to objectively assess arguments and ensure sound judgments. We hear this term thrown around constantly, but its true power really lies in that third pillar, reflection. Reflection acts as the ultimate quality control against our own confirmation biases. When you truly use critical thinking, you aren't just absorbing information and evaluating the external evidence, you're ruthlessly interrogating your own favored hypotheses. You are holding your own assumptions up to the light. By reflecting on how your biases might actually be coloring your analysis, you strip away subjective preference, leaving only the objective reality. This rigorous breakdown is exactly what separates a knee-jerk reaction from a truly sound judgment. Next up is a truly fascinating concept, decompositional reasoning. This tool literally breaks massive, complex problems down into smaller, easily manageable parts. Think about the monumental achievement of the Apollo 11 moon landing. You don't just solve how to put a human on the moon in one giant leap. The problem is way too vast. Instead, scientists used decompositional reasoning. They isolated the problem into propulsion. Then they solved life support. Then orbital mechanics. Then communication arrays. When you're faced with a completely overwhelming challenge, you don't tackle the whole mountain at once. You decompose it into pebbles. You analyze and solve it systematically, piece by piece. It's the ultimate strategic framework for turning the impossible into the achievable. Section 5. Your ultimate mental toolkit. Look, this isn't just abstract theory. This is the toolkit in action. You use these exact frameworks to navigate complexity every single day. Picture a startup founder on launch day. The main server suddenly crashes. Well, they immediately deploy cause and effect reasoning to isolate the bug. Later on, user feedback starts trickling in, and they use inductive reasoning to spot a brand new UI trend among hundreds of comments. When funding gets tight, they use decompositional reasoning to break their annual burn rate down into manageable weekly cash flow targets. And when they're designing their next marketing blitz, they use analogical reasoning to emulate a wildly successful campaign from a completely different industry. The human mind cycles through these tools seamlessly, switching gears to attack every unique professional and personal challenge we face. Human reasoning is a delicate, beautiful balance of logic, observation, creativity, and judgment. It really takes all of these working in perfect harmony to navigate our complex world. Relying too heavily on just one tool creates massive blind spots. If you're purely logical without the creative leaps of analogical reasoning, you become rigid. If you're highly observant but lack critical reflection, you fall victim to bias pretty quickly. It is the synthesis of these frameworks, the ability to pivot from top-down deduction to abductive guesswork, that creates the true foundation of human intelligence. It's the harmonious balance of this entire toolkit that lets us adapt, innovate, and thrive in a totally unpredictable universe. So the next time you're facing a seemingly impossible wall, ask yourself, do I need to build an entirely new theory from the ground up? Or do I just need to systematically break this wall down into smaller pieces? Which tool will you reach for first? Now that you can consciously recognize the difference between deductive proof, abductive leaps, and decompositional problem solving, you have the power to deliberately engineer your approach to absolutely any challenge. You have the ultimate mental toolkit right at your disposal. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer on the architecture of human reasoning. Get out there, trust your architecture, and keep learning.